Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another video on Traumacist RX. I'm Freddie, a critical care pharmacist, and if you're watching this video, it probably means you want more tips on how to be better at code blues. So if you are a healthcare provider or new healthcare provider watching this video, you already know that code blues are probably one of the most scariest, traumatizing, probably stress-inducing events that all of us go through when we have a patient that unfortunately crashes. And for those of you that aren't healthcare providers or know anything about healthcare, a code blue is one of those medical emergencies that you might see on TV where they're doing chest compressions.
Epi, charging into 200.
What happened?
And they're also asking for an epinephrine.
Epi, charge to 200.
I'm taking over.
Charged. Clear.
And basically what happens is the patient's heart or breathing stops, and some of us in the hospital are designated to respond to these events and try to revive the patient. So if you're into that, this is the video for you, and hopefully these tips that I actually give to my residents and students will be essential in your career and help you become better at code blues. So before we actually get to the video, please take a moment to like and subscribe below so that way this information gets to the people who need it most, and thank you for supporting the channel. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, so the first tip is safety first. And I like to break this down into three different sorts of levels of safety. So the first level of safety is getting to the code blue. So one time in my emergency medicine rotation, I actually did a ride along with an ambulance, and one of the most important rules they taught me is that when they go to a code, or when they go to like a call to someone's house, they have to get there safely so they could help the patient, right? So trying to get to the code safely is always super important. If you're someone who's on the other side of the hospital and you're trying to run to a code, you know, you have all that adrenaline going and you want to get to that code that's on the edge of the hospital or wherever as soon as possible, try to be careful. Try not to run in the hospital. I know sometimes I myself catch myself running in the hospital, and when you're turning corners, make sure to look at, usually there's some mirrors where you can see around the corner so that way you don't get run over by a bed or something. You want to get to the code safely so that way you can participate and help the patient as fast as possible. And then that brings me to the next thing. When you actually arrive to a code, you want to look, before you go inside of the room, some signs that the patient might be a kind of higher acuity patient or someone that you need to take some precautions about. So some things that I look for personally are precaution signs on the door. So for instance, if a patient's a COVID patient, I might look for signs that say, you know, respiratory isolation. So that way I don't go into a room and accidentally get COVID. Or maybe if the patient has C. diff, Clostridium difficile infection, I make sure I wear the correct PPE, so like a gown, a mask, gloves, and all that sort of thing. So once you're at the code, look for any precautions, see if any of your teammates who arrive there are putting on some PPE, personal protective equipment, so that way you can protect yourself first. And kind of like when you're on an airplane, right? When they say, if there's no oxygen, make sure to put the mask down for yourself first. It's that same situation. Protect yourself at first so that way you can help the person who's crashing and coding. And then the third thing is once you get to a code, if you're dealing with medications, or you might not even be dealing with medications, but in the code there might be medications, people drawing blood, the patient might be vomiting or other fluids flying everywhere. You want to make sure that you protect yourself, make sure that if you step in something wet, you're not going to slip. If there's needles around, you want to make sure that you're moving carefully in the patient's room, especially if there's like 20 people in a very small room. I've had situations where residents and students, they're trying to drop their medications and there's needles. I try to tell them, you know, watch where your elbows are. If you get elbowed and the needle's pointing the wrong way, you can poke somebody. So always be careful about that. And sometimes when we're drawing blood and someone's doing compressions, you know, the patient's moving, everyone's moving. So just be careful about sharps and that sort of thing. So before we move on to the next tip, let's just kind of like summarize that safety thing. So safety first, make sure to always look where you're going and be careful turning corners in the hospital or wherever you're responding. Make sure that when you get to the code, you put the right protective equipment on you so that way you don't get any infections or weird things happening to you after the code, or get exposed to something that you don't want to get exposed to. And then 3, if you're in the code participating, look at your surroundings, make sure there's no sharps, things that will make you slip, other things that will make you either get shocked by the AED machine or anything like that. So just watch your surroundings and you'll be fine. All right, so the second tip after you put on all your PPE, you've arrived at the code, you're ready to go, is to listen and assess. A lot of times I hear or I see people run to the code and they're jumbled around trying to insert themselves in the emergency situation, which is all good. I think it's good intentions, but really you want to get to the code, listen and kind of digest what is happening. So for instance, some things that I personally look for as a responder, and maybe not necessarily as a pharmacist, but anybody can do this, is, is the patient getting compressions? Are we bagging the patient? Are they getting airway stuff going on? Are there other people in the room? Is there a team leader? Are you the highest level there? So like sometimes I've been to codes where I'm the first person to arrive, besides the nurse who pushed the code button. So she's doing compressions and I'm trying to figure out what to do next. Are there other people in the room? Is there family in the room? So that's super important. Whenever you go to an emergency and you see family in the room, they're getting hit with all of this trauma right off the bat with their loved one, dead essentially. So you want to be careful and mindful of what you say, watch your language, try to be as professional as possible. Read the room in general, like are people yelling? Do we need to calm down? Do people have roles, which we'll talk about next? And where are we at in the ACLS or CPR process? Have we given meds? Has the patient taken anything that we need to kind of like reverse, that sort of thing? And that should only take a few seconds to kind of figure out. You're listening, you're looking, and you're also feeling like, are there people around you? Can you not move? Is there a crash cart right there? So that brings me to the third tip, which is identify yourself in the code and know your role or pick a role that you're good at. So a lot of people kind of make fun of me for this, but when I go to codes, the first thing I do after putting on my PPE, no one can identify you. We have gowns sometimes, we have masks, we have face shields, things that obscure, what my badge says, which says pharmacist usually. So when I go to code, if I don't know anybody there, the first thing I'm going to do is identify myself and I'll say, pharmacist is here, how can I help? And usually there's a nurse there who just broke up in the crash cart that's struggling or trying to put together some medications while listening to orders from the physician. So I'll try to let them ease into it and say, hey, I'll take care of meds, go ahead and figure out what you need to do next. So then they'll move on and help with IVs or whatever access they need to get. And same thing for if you're a respiratory therapist, maybe the transport nurse was bagging the patient. Maybe you can be like, respiratory therapist is here. I'll go ahead and take over the airway stuff, and then you kind of move and migrate to that direction. After you identify yourself, which is super important, you want to try to pick the role and then position yourself in a place where you are conducive to the team. So for instance, as a pharmacist, I'll position myself in between the crash cart, the team leader, who's usually like a pulmonologist or a physician, and I'll also be close to the administering RN. So that's another thing that I do too, is the importance of finding your role kind of helps ease the process of giving meds. So for me, I'll identify the physician, the administering RN, and then kind of myself. So we're like this triangle of people. So those are things to think about. Again, you want to identify yourself so people know who you are. And if you're someone who's just spectating, you obviously don't want to create a crowd and that sort of thing too as well. So things to keep in mind as far as identifying yourself and finding a role. Out of all the tips so far, they've been pretty self-explanatory. This fourth tip, I think a lot of people kind of shortcut their way in a code, but that's set the team up for success. So even though I may be a pharmacist, there are certain things that I do to help the nurses, physicians, get the patient the best situation possible to have a good code, right? So when I'm in the code, I already know what's happening because I was step 2, listen and assess. People know who I am, so that's step 3. Step 4, you want to make sure that, let's say the patient is getting CPR. I want to double check that there's a backboard on the patient, so that way we can get good chest compressions. So I look behind our crash cart, which has a backboard, and I'll make sure hey, do we have a backboard on this patient? If not, let me grab this and give it to the patient. If the patient has an airway, I'm trying to make sure that we have an end-tidal CO2 monitor. So for those who are not healthcare providers, end-tidal CO2 monitor helps us figure out if we're doing good compressions, or if the patient has been revived, or has a ROSC, or return of spontaneous circulation. So that's number 2. And then the third thing I'll check is if the patient has pads. So without pads, we can't shock the patient. We don't really know what rhythm is going on, and we can't stop the patient's coding process without that. So those are the 3 things that I'll think about to set up the team for success. Again, that is place a backboard on the patient, so that way we can do good chest compressions. End-tidal CO2 monitor, so that way we can monitor the patient's CO2 and see if they've come back and revived themselves after our CPR. And then number 3 are pads. So pads will help shock the patient in case they're in like VFib. And a quick tip that I learned when I was going through ACLS is if they're VFib, you're going to defib. So if you hear that, even if you're not even a cardiologist or anything like that, you hear VFib from the team, all right, defib. VFib, defib. So those are 3 things you want to think about: backboard and tidal CO2, and also the pads. Some other things to think about too is, as a pharmacist, I'm obviously helping with medications, and if we're going in through a long code, maybe 30 to 45 minutes, I always keep an inventory of what's happening in the cart. So number 1 is probably the medications. There's 10 EPIs in my crash cart in the hospital. So it's kind of like thinking about ammo or like your inventory, right? We've gone through 8 sessions of CPR, and we've given 8 EPIs. I have 2 more. I better call down to my pharmacy team to get some more medications. If we are doing medications and all that sort of thing, we're going to be using flushes after every medication. There's 10 in my crash cart, so I'll go ahead and ask a nurse or someone outside of the room, hey, I'm about to run out of flushes and we need a bunch more, so get me some 10 ml flushes from the med room, and so someone can get out of the room and go to the med room and then give you some more flushes. And those are things to kind of get the code going, to get the momentum and the sort of pattern going. So I'll put maybe an ACLS thing right here so you can kind of see. And a disclaimer, this is an ACLS video, by the way, but if you are going to respond to codes, you might as well know the basics. So anyways, those are things that I do to get the team set up for success. Some other things to set yourself up for success outside of a code is to get yourself a badge buddy, some sort of thing in your pocket where you can help know the automatic doses for medications. Maybe keep like little ACLS chart, kind of like the one that I'll put here, and that way you can keep these things in your pocket. So I know that a lot of pharmacists have asked me for tips, and if you're watching this, thank you for supporting. But keep those things in your pocket, and let me go grab my badge buddy and pocket ACLS. I'll be right back. Alright, so a little movie magic here. Here is like my pocket ACLS guide. So I just went to the ACLS website, got the PDFs for, the main things, which is cardiac arrest, and you can kind of see here, maybe I'll bring it closer. You can see all this sort of stuff, and the main thing that you want is kind of this piece of paper, this part of the paper right here. So this is the algorithm that we use. And then on this piece of paper, I actually have my H's and T's over here. So H's and T's are something to think about as well. Probably for another video I'll have to do it, but hope you can see that okay. So yeah, I have this little pocket guide to keep in my pocket. I personally memorize all the stuff in here, but let's say I have a nurse that I've never worked with or isn't trained in ACLS, I'll give them this so they can kind of like follow along. So yeah, that's a cool thing. And another thing is, I don't know if you guys are into football, which is football season right now, Fly Eagles Fly. But for me, on my badge, I keep a little badge buddy. So if you notice in the football, quarterbacks, they have all the plays on their hand, right? So, or on their wrist, they'll be, okay, this play, we're going to do this play right now. I do the same thing, so I'll have my badge right here, and then I have my playbook right here. So here's an example. Here's my badge, and then if my badge is like this, I'll look, okay, here are my dosing. So here's an example I'll show you right here. And hopefully you can see that okay. And maybe I'll post like a full version PDF sometime in the link, in a link below or something, so you can see that. But basically, that's my badge buddy. It's kind of like if I'm like a quarterback and I'm like, all right, here's my play. This is what I'm gonna do. Here's my medication. What's the weight? Yeah. So anyways, those are some things to help you set yourself up for success. Again, Code Blues are a team sport, so even if you're not a nurse, you're not a pharmacist, you can help the team, get the medications ready. You can help listen out for things. You can listen to the, look at the med list, look at the MAR. Did the patient get something that we could reverse? Do we need to get something outside of the room that only you know where it is? Do you know where the ultrasound is? Do you know where the iStat is? All these things will help the code go successful, and depending on what your situation is, you kind of want to try to help as best as possible. So after you do steps 1 through 4, and the code has finished, the last thing you want to do, and this is probably one of the most important tips in the whole video, is to debrief. So I didn't really learn the importance of debriefing until I became a resident pharmacist and was responding to codes by myself. But it's really important to, after the code, whether it goes good or bad, whether there's a positive or negative outcome, you always want to talk about what happened in the code with your pharmacist preceptor, your colleague, your nursing colleague, or as the whole Code Blue response team right after the code. So this doesn't have to take long, it doesn't have to take all day, it doesn't have to be formal, but some things that I think are helpful for people who respond to the code, because again, it's a scary, stressful event. A million things are happening at once. It's scary. You know, patients' lives are either ended or revived, you know, that sort of thing. So it's crazy. Some things that I talk about with my learners when we debrief are, you know, how did that code make you feel? And I know that's kind of maybe like soft or whatever, but honestly, you don't want to go to your next code with the baggage of your previous code. So, you know, how did that make you feel? What are some things that you think you did good? You know, even if the patient expired and didn't make it, what skills did you do to make that code as best as possible? I think for me, that one thing that helps me kind of move on and cope with the code is knowing that I did my studying before the code. I did my best to assess the situation. I made the best recommendations I could to the team. And therefore, if I try my best and tried my best for the patient, I know that I walk away from that code giving my all. So that's how I kind of cope with it. And anyway, some other things in the debrief I might ask are like, what are things we could have improved on for the next code? So one time I had a code as a resident, like a mega one, where we emptied the entire crash cart. We did pretty much every protocol, like hyperkalemia. Did the patient have torsades? So we gave magnesium. We got all the stuff in the room. And, you know, I've never drawn up magnesium, and magnesium is something that you need to dilute before you give it, otherwise you can cause the vessels to kind of get damaged. So my first time drawing up magnesium, the way that we do it at our facility is I use like flushes and that sort of thing to dilute it, and I didn't take out enough fluids when I was drawing up the magnesium and had to wait for another magnesium from the pharmacy to come up. And so that was one thing that I always talked about with my preceptor after that code, like how could I have been better? Well, next time I know, you know, for magnesium I'm going to take out this much fluids, etc., etc. And so for you out there going to a code and you're debriefing, like talk about what went right, talk about how you could have done better, like could we have had this medication in the crash cart so it's faster? Should I have called for an ISTAT after the second set of compressions? Should I have done XYZ? Should I have told the physician this? Should I have done that? You know, so you want to debrief, get that off your chest, and also find ways to improve, and also find ways that you did well. So that way you pat yourself on the back. You did your best you could for someone who is in an impossible situation. You know. So anyways, debriefing super important, and hopefully that's something that you focus on, not just as a pharmacist or a professional, but if you're a student watching this, you want to focus on that with your preceptors. Say like, hey, I know I have a lot of work to do with my project, but can we just debrief for 5 seconds, 5 minutes about what happened in this code? I think that is the sign of a good healthcare practitioner, because you're actually like digesting the situation afterwards and you're learning from it. So anyways, to conclude, basically the 5 tips that I think are essential for you to be successful as a Code Blue person, responder, or even any healthcare professional. Safety first. Make sure to assess the situation, visualize, and kind of like absorb all of that stuff in. Tip 3, identify yourself and identify a role that you're good at. Tip 4, set the team up for success. And then tip 5, you want to debrief afterwards no matter what. So I hope this was helpful to you as a healthcare provider, even as a family member of someone who unfortunately had a code, or if someone told you like, oh, this patient might code, this is what we're going to do, XYZ, chest compressions. Maybe you can understand kind of like that point of view as well. And the last thing that I'll leave you with is Code Blues. Obviously, they're scary, they're stressful. One thing that kind of makes me get through codes, with confidence and also with less kind of stress and less anxiety about them. One of my preceptors, my critical care preceptor, she told me, Code Blue is doing the impossible. You're taking someone whose life has ended, their heart has stopped, and you're doing the impossible by bringing them back to life. So if you kind of think about it like that, there's really kind of like a no-lose situation here. You're doing your best for the patient. You're trying to bring them back from a situation that is basically like a lose-lose. and you try your best. And if you do all of those things, then you should feel confident going to any code, because you know that you're doing something that's impossible, basically. So anyways, hopefully this wasn't too dark of a video for you, and hopefully I smiled enough for you to enjoy the video. But anyways, if you like this sort of content, these Code Blue tips, make sure to like and subscribe below. A lot of you love the Code Blue videos. Those are some of my most popular ones, and so I'll do more. Code Blues are some of my favorite topics, because without Code Blue tips and education, we can't be better responders for our patients at their worst point in life, right? So anyways, stick around for more, and if you want to check out more videos, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Alright, take care, stay safe out there, share these tips with your learners as well, and hopefully that you get better at your next Code Blue. Hey everyone! Say hi, Carmel. Hi, Carmel! If you like this Code Blue video and you want more information, all that sort of thing, make sure to boop above Carmel's head and subscribe, and also check out some of the videos right here. Alright, take care. Say bye, Carmel! Alright, take care, guys. Bye.